The war was lost. Everyone in the Ethon Dominion knew it, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. The Hollow Collective had already eaten 3 of their outer colonies. Millions of Ethon people were gone. Not dead. Gone. The Collective did not kill. They consumed. They took everything and left nothing behind. Emperor Vorus stood alone in his throne room, looking at the star map floating before him. Red marks showed where the enemy had struck. Blue marks showed what remained of his empire. There was so much red now. Too much red. His advisors had given him the same answer for months. Fight harder. Build more ships. Train more soldiers. But the Ethon people were not warriors. They were scholars and artists and builders. They had lived in peace for 2,000 years. They did not know how to win a war like this. There was only one species in the galaxy that did. Vorus closed his eyes and thought about what he was going to do. His people feared humans more than they feared the Collective. At least the Collective was honest about what it was. The Collective was a swarm, a mindless hunger that spread across the stars. But humans were something else. Humans chose violence. They came from a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had learned to kill it back. They fought wars against each other for fun. They smiled when they bled. The stories said that humans had once faced the Collective too, a small colony on the edge of their space. The Collective sent 10,000 drones to consume it. The humans sent 50 soldiers to defend it. When the battle ended, all 10,000 drones were dead. 43 humans survived. They did not run. They did not hide. They stood in the fire, and they burned everything that came near them. That was why Vorus had to do this. His people could not defeat the Collective alone. They needed monsters to fight monsters. He sent the message to Earth that night. The response came faster than he expected. The United Council of Earth agreed to help. They would send ships and soldiers and weapons. They would teach the Ethon people how to fight. But they wanted something in return. They wanted a bond between the two species. Something permanent. Something that would tie their futures together so that neither side could walk away. They wanted a marriage. Vorus read the message 3 times. A political marriage was not strange. His own ancestors had used them to unite the old Ethon kingdoms. But this was different. This was asking one of his children to marry a human. To live with a human. To build a family with a human. He had 4 daughters and 2 sons. His eldest daughter was already married to a noble family. His sons were too young. His second and third daughters had already refused when he mentioned the possibility. That left only Lyra, his youngest, his kindest, his most gentle child. She would hate him for this, but she would do it. She loved her people more than she feared her own future. The council sent him a list of candidates. Human men and women who were willing to represent their species in this union. Soldiers and diplomats and scientists. Vorus looked through them carefully, searching for someone who might be gentle with his daughter. Then he saw the file for Kong Taeho. The man was a soldier. Not just any soldier. He was what humans called a war hero. He had fought in 12 major battles against various enemies. He had medals and honors and titles. But one story stood out above all others. The Battle of Vela-9. A human colony had been attacked by a collective swarm. The main defense force was destroyed in the first hour. Reinforcements were 17 hours away. One man had held the defensive line alone. One man against thousands of drones. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found Kong Taeho standing in a field of broken metal and torn flesh. He was bleeding from dozens of wounds. His weapons were destroyed. He was fighting with his bare hands. 2,000 drones died that day. Taeho killed most of them himself. The humans called him the ghost of Villanin. The collective called him nothing, because they did not have words for what he was. He was a nightmare given flesh. He was death walking on 2 legs, and the council wanted him to marry Lyra. Vorus understood why. Taeho's reputation alone would make enemies think twice about attacking. If the Ethon Dominion had the ghost of Villanin standing beside them, even the collective might hesitate. It was smart. It was logical. It was also cruel. He called Lyra to the throne room that evening. She came quickly, her violet skin glowing softly in the light of the setting sun. Her silver eyes were curious and trusting. She had no idea what was coming. "Father," she said, "you wanted to see me?" Voris could not look at her. He stared at the floor as he explained. The war, the alliance, the marriage. He told her everything except the part that mattered most. He could not bring himself to say the name. "Who?" Lyra asked. Her voice was shaking. "Who do they want me to marry?" Voris activated the hologram. Tejo's image appeared in the air between them. A human male with dark eyes and a long scar running from his left temple to his jaw. His expression was empty, not cruel, not kind. Just empty, like a blade waiting to be used. Lyra made a sound that broke her father's heart. It was small and quiet and full of terror. "I have read about him," she whispered. "Father, please." "Not him. Anyone but him, Lyra. He killed 2,000 enemies alone. He fights until his body breaks, and then he keeps fighting. The reports say he does not feel pain like normal creatures do. They say he does not feel anything at all." Tears were running down her face now. "I'm scared of that human warrior. Please, Father. I'm begging you." "Not him." Voris finally looked at his daughter. She was trembling like a leaf in a storm. She was the gentlest soul he had ever known, and he was about to give her to a man who had been forged in blood and fire. "That is exactly why it must be him," he said. His voice was heavy with grief. "We do not need a diplomat or a scientist. We need the monster that the collective fears. We need the ghost." Lyra said nothing. She understood. She was a princess, and princesses did not have the luxury of choosing their own fate. She wiped her tears and straightened her spine and looked at the hologram of the man who would become her husband. She would do her duty. She would marry the monster. She would save her people. But standing there in the fading light, staring at those empty dark eyes, Princess Lyra had never been more afraid in her entire life. The human ship arrived 3 days later. The human ship was smaller than Lyra expected. She had imagined something massive and terrifying, covered in weapons and armor. Instead, the vessel that landed in the royal courtyard was simple and clean. It looked almost peaceful. The entire royal court had gathered to welcome the delegation. Nobles and advisors and servants stood in perfect rows, dressed in their finest clothes. Emperor Voris waited at the front, his face calm and welcoming. Lyra stood just behind him, trying to control her breathing. She had not slept in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hologram. Those empty dark eyes? That terrible scar? She had read every report she could find about Kong Tejo. Each one made her more afraid. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss. A woman walked out first. She was human, with black hair pulled back in a neat style and a warm smile on her face. She wore a simple military uniform with several medals on her chest. She moved with confidence and grace, and when she reached Emperor Voris, she performed the traditional Ethon greeting gesture perfectly. "Your Majesty," she said. Her accent was strange, but her words were clear. "I am Colonel Yunhana, diplomatic liaison for the Terran Military Corps. It is an honor to meet you." Voris returned the greeting. "Welcome to Ethon Prime, Colonel. We are grateful for your presence." Hannah smiled and stepped aside. "Allow me to introduce the rest of our delegation." Will rare with soldiers and scientists and diplomats. They were all different sizes and shapes and colors. Some smiled. Some looked nervous. Some looked around the courtyard with curious eyes, studying everything they saw. Then he appeared. Kong Taeho walked out of the ship like a shadow given form. He was not as big as Lyra had imagined. He was average height for a human, with a lean and efficient build. He wore the same simple uniform as the others. But something about him was different. He moved wrong. That was the only way Lyra could describe it. Every other person in the courtyard moved like a living creature. They shifted their weight. They looked around. They breathed and blinked and existed in the normal way. Taeho moved like a predator, conserving energy. Every step was precise. Every motion was controlled. He did not waste a single movement. His eyes found her almost immediately. Dark and deep and impossibly tired. They were not empty like she had thought from the hologram. They were full of something she could not name. Something heavy and old and sad. The scar on his face was worse in person. It started at his left temple and ran all the way down to his jaw. The skin around it was rough and uneven. Someone had tried to kill him once. They had failed. Lyra realized she had stopped breathing. She forced air into her lungs and looked away. The welcoming feast was held in the great hall that night. Long tables were filled with the finest food the palace could offer. Music played softly in the background. Nobles laughed and talked and pretended that everything was normal. Lyra was seated beside Taeho. It was tradition. The betrothed couple was supposed to share their first meal together, to begin building the bond that would last their lifetimes. But Lyra could not eat. She could not even lift her fork. Her hands were shaking too badly. Taeho sat beside her in silence. He ate slowly and carefully, tasting each dish with what looked like genuine appreciation. He did not try to talk to her. He did not look at her. He simply existed in the space beside her, quiet and still. Then he reached for his drink and Lyra flinched. It was a small movement. She pulled back just a few inches, her body reacting before her mind could stop it. But Taeho noticed. Of course, he noticed. A man who had survived the things he had survived noticed everything. He set his cup down without drinking. "You are afraid of me," he said quietly. His voice was softer than she expected, lower. There was no anger in it. No judgment. Just a simple statement of fact. Lyra forced herself to look at him. Up close, she could see more scars, small ones on his hands and neck. Marks left by battles she could not imagine. "Everyone is afraid of humans," she whispered. Taeho nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands, at the scars that covered them like a map of pain. "Sometimes," he said, "we are afraid of ourselves, too." Lyra did not know what to say to that. She had expected a monster. She had expected cold eyes and cruel words and the promise of violence. She had not expected this quiet sadness. She had not expected him to sound so tired. Across the hall, General Krell watched them with hate in his eyes. Krell was the commander of the royal fleet. He had served the Ethon Dominion for 40 years. He had dedicated his entire life to protecting his people. And now his emperor was inviting humans into their home. Monsters, killers, beasts who enjoyed war the way normal creatures enjoyed food and sleep. It was disgusting. It was wrong. It was a betrayal of everything the Ethon people stood for. Krell had already sent messages to his allies. Other generals and nobles who felt the same way he did. They had made a plan. The alliance would never be completed. The marriage would never happen. They would find a way to drive the humans out before they could corrupt the Dominion with their violent ways. He looked at Taeho and felt his stomach turn. The humans sat there so calmly, pretending to be civilized. But Krell knew what he really was. He had read the reports from Villanine. He knew what that creature was capable of. The ghost of Villanine. It's a monster wearing human skin. And Krell would rather die than let that monster marry his princess. The feast ended late. Lyra returned to her chambers exhausted and confused. She had spent the entire evening sitting beside the most dangerous man in the galaxy, and he had not threatened her. He had not tried to scare her. He had simply sat there, quiet and sad, and told her that he understood her fear. It made no sense. Monsters were supposed to be cruel. Monsters were supposed to enjoy the fear they caused. They were not supposed to look at their scarred hands with shame in their eyes. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand. Somewhere in the guest wing of the palace, Taeho lay in his own bed, staring at his own ceiling. He had seen the fear in the princess's eyes. He had seen it 1,000 times before, on 1,000 different faces. Humans were the galaxy's nightmare. Everyone knew what they were capable of. He wondered if she would ever see him as anything else. He wondered if he deserved to be seen as anything else. In his dreams, he was back on Villanin. The drones were coming. They were always coming. And he was standing alone in the fire, doing the only thing he knew how to do. He woke up screaming just before dawn. Colonel Hannah was already there, sitting in the chair beside his bed. She did not say anything. She just sat with him until the shaking stopped, the same way she had done 100 times before. Some monsters, she knew, needed someone to remind them that they were still human. The betrothal customs of the Ethon. People required the future couple to spend time together every day. They were supposed to walk in the gardens, share meals, and learn about each other. It was meant to be a beautiful process. Two souls slowly becoming one. For Lyra, it felt like torture. Every morning, she woke up knowing that she would have to face him. The ghost. The monster. The man who had killed 2,000 enemies with his bare hands. She dressed in her finest clothes, put on her bravest face, and went to meet her future husband. For the first week, they barely spoke. Taeho seemed to understand her fear. He kept his distance. He never touched her. He never raised his voice. He just walked beside her in the gardens, silent and patient, letting her get used to his presence. It was during the second week that everything changed. Lyra came to the gardens early that morning. She wanted a few moments of peace before the day began. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The flowers were opening their petals to drink the light. It was beautiful and calm and exactly what she needed. Then she saw him. Taeho was kneeling in the grass near the old stone wall. His back was to her. He was hunched over something, his hands moving carefully and gently. Lyra's first thought was fear. What was he doing? Was he hurt? Was he hurting something else? She crept closer, trying to see without being seen. It was a Velki. A small, furry creature about the size of her fist. Velkis were pests. They ate the flowers and damaged the gardens. The servants usually killed them on sight. This Velki was injured. Its leg was bent at a wrong angle. It was making small sounds of pain. Taeho was bandaging its leg. Lyra watched in disbelief as the deadliest man in the galaxy carefully wrapped a tiny piece of cloth around the leg of a wounded pest. His hands, which had killed thousands, moved with incredible gentleness. His face, which she had thought was empty of all emotion, was full of concentration and care. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. Taeho did not seem surprised by her voice. He finished tying the bandage and gently set the Velki down. It hobbled away into the bushes, confused but alive. It was hurting, he said simply. Lyra did not understand. But it is just a pest. No one would care if it died. Taeho stood up and brushed the dirt from his knees. He looked at her with those deep, tired eyes. I would care, he said. I have seen enough death. I do not need to add more. Something shifted in Lyra's heart that morning. Not much, just a small crack in the wall of fear she had built around herself. But it was enough to make her curious. Over the following days, she started paying closer attention to her future husband. She watched him when he did not know she was watching. And she began to see things that did not fit the stories she had heard. She found him in the palace library one afternoon, reading Ethon poetry. Not military reports or battle plans. Poetry. The same poems her mother had read to her when she was a child. He was mouthing the words to himself. Practicing the pronunciation like a student, she learned from Colonel Hannah that Taeho sent most of his salary back to Earth. There was an orphanage in a city called Busan, children who had lost their parents in various wars. Taeho had grown up in that orphanage. Now he made sure no child there ever went hungry. She discovered that he woke up screaming almost every night. The servants whispered about it. The sounds came from his room in the dark hours before dawn. Terrible sounds. The sounds of a man trapped in a nightmare he could not escape. One evening, Lyra gathered her courage and asked him about it. They were sitting in the small courtyard outside the library. The stars were coming out one by one. It was quiet and peaceful, and for the first time Lyra did not feel afraid to be alone with him. "The stories say humans love war," she said carefully. "Is that true?" Tejo was quiet for a long moment. He looked up at the stars, and his face was full of something Lyra could not name. "No," he said finally. "We do not love it. We are just good at it. There is a difference. I do not understand." He turned to look at her. In the starlight, his scar looked silver instead of red. "Being good at something terrible is its own kind of curse," he said. "When you can do something that others cannot, people expect you to do it. They need you to do it. So you do it again and again until it becomes all you know." Villainine Lyra whispered. Tejo nodded. "The reports tell you I killed 2,000 drones. They tell you I held the line for 17 hours. They make it sound like glory." His voice became rough. "They do not tell you about the screaming. They do not tell you about the faces of friends dying around you. They do not tell you what it feels like to keep fighting when your body's broken and your mind is begging you to stop." He held up his scarred hands. "These hands have done terrible things. I cannot undo them. I cannot forget them. Every night I am back on Villainine. The drones are coming. My friends are dying. And I am standing in the middle of it, doing the only thing I know how to do." Tears were falling down his cheeks now. The ghost of Villainine was crying in front of her. "I am not a monster," he said quietly. "I am just a man who has done monstrous things to protect people he loves. And I have to live with that every single day." It was the first time she had touched him willingly. His fingers were rough and warm and shaking slightly. "I think I understand now," she said. That night General Krell made his move. A device was planted in the human quarters. It was designed to look like a simple malfunction, a gas leak that would kill everyone while they slept. Quiet, clean. No one would know it was. That sabotage. But Tejo did not sleep like normal people. His body had learned to wake at the slightest danger. He smelled the gas before it reached deadly levels. He evacuated the entire delegation in 4 minutes. No one died. No one was even hurt. The investigation found nothing. The saboteur had covered their tracks well. But Tejo knew. He had been a soldier too long not to recognize an assassination attempt at the morning meal. His eyes found General Krell across the room. He did not say anything. He did not make any accusations. He simply looked at the general with those deep, knowing eyes. Krell felt ice run through his veins. The human knew. The monster knew. And judging by the look in those eyes, the monster was very, very patient. The attack came without warning on a clear morning, when the sky was blue and the birds were singing. Lyra was in the garden when the first explosions shook the ground. She looked up and saw fire falling from the sky. 3 massive ships were hanging above the city, black and terrible, shaped like the claws of some ancient beast. The Hollow Collective had found them. Alarms screamed across the palace. Guards ran in every direction. Servants screamed and fled. The beautiful peace of the morning shattered like glass. Lyra ran toward the throne room. Her father would be there. Her family would be there. She had to reach them. She did not make it far before a hand grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a pillar. She started to scream, but then she saw who it was. Tejo. His face was completely different from before. The sadness was gone. The tiredness was gone. In its place was something cold and focused and terrifying. This was not the man who bandaged wounded animals and cried about his nightmares. This was the ghost of Villainine. "Stay with me," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "I will get you to safety." The palace was chaos. Collective drones were already landing in the outer districts. The Ethon fleet was scrambling to respond, but they were badly outnumbered. Enemy forces were everywhere. Tejo moved through the chaos like water flowing around stones. He seemed to know exactly where every danger was. He pulled Lyra left when an explosion hit the right corridor. He pushed her down when plasma fires shot over their heads. He killed 3 drones that appeared from a side passage. Moving so fast that Lyra barely saw what happened, they reached the throne room in minutes. Emperor Vorus was there with the rest of the royal family, surrounded by palace guards. Colonel Hannah was already organizing defenses, shouting orders in a voice that cut through the noise. "The main gates are compromised," one of the guards reported. His voice was shaking. "Enemy forces are pushing through. We cannot hold them." Vorus looked around at his family, his children, his people. There was no escape route. The ships above were blocking any attempt to flee. They were trapped. "How many drones?" Tejo asked. The guard checked his scanner. 800. Maybe more. And more are landing every minute. 800 drones against a handful of palace guards. It was hopeless. Everyone knew it. Te-Ho turned to Hannah. "How many of ours?" 23 combat ready, she answered, plus yourself. 24 humans against 800 drones. The math was impossible. Even for humans, this was suicide. But Tejo just nodded like she had told him the weather. "We will hold the main gate," he said. "Keep the royal family in the throne room. Do not open the doors for anyone until I give the signal." Lyra grabbed his arm. "You cannot fight them alone. There are too many." Tejo looked at her. For just a moment, the coldness in his eyes softened. He almost smiled. "I will not be alone," he said. "Every human in this delegation was chosen for a reason. We know what we are. We know what we can do." He gently removed her hand from his arm. "Stay with Hannah. Stay safe. I will buy you time." "How much time?" she asked. He was already walking toward the door. "As much as I can." The 24 humans met at the main gate. They were soldiers and scientists and diplomats, but in that moment, they were all the same thing. They were humans, and their people were in danger. Tejo did not give a speech. He did not need to. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew what was expected. They checked their weapons. They took their positions, and they waited. The drones came like a wave of death. Metal bodies filled the courtyard. Red eyes glowed in the smoke. The sound of their movement was like 1,000 knives scraping against stone. The humans opened fire. The Ethon guards, watching from the windows, had never seen anything like it. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like forces of nature. They moved and shot and killed with a rhythm that seemed almost beautiful in its destruction. But there were too many drones. The wave kept coming. The humans were pushed back step by step. They ran out of ammunition and switched to blades. They ran out of blades and fought with their hands. One by one they fell. A scientist named Park took a plasma bolt to the chest, but kept fighting for another 3 minutes before she collapsed. A diplomat named Choi broke both his arms and started using his head to bash in drone skulls. They did not retreat. They did not break. They stood in the fire, and they burned everything that came near them. Tejo was at the center of it all. He moved like nothing Lyra had ever seen. Every motion was death. Every step left broken drones behind him. He took wounds that should have killed him. A blade through his shoulder. Plasma burns across his back. His own blood covered him like a second skin. And still, he kept fighting. The drone count climbed. 100. 200. 300. Tejo killed them all. He fought like a man who had already died and had nothing left to lose. He fought like a man protecting something more important than his own life. For hours passed, then 8, then 12. The Ethon reinforcements finally arrived at hour 14. Fresh ships broke through the collective blockade. Soldiers poured into the palace. The drones began to retreat. When the soldiers reached the main gate, they found a field of broken metal and torn flesh. Hundreds of destroyed drones covered the ground like fallen leaves. The smell of burning and blood filled the air. In the middle of it all stood Kung Te-Ho. He was the last one standing. All 23 of his companions had fallen around him. He was covered in wounds that should have killed him twice over. His weapons were destroyed. His hands were broken, but he was still on his feet, still facing the enemy, still ready to fight. 112 drones. That was his final count. 112 enemies killed by his hands alone. The reinforcements stared at him in disbelief. This was not possible. No creature could survive what he had survived. No creature could do what he had done. But humans were not like other creatures. In the aftermath, they found General Krell's body in a side corridor. He had been killed by collective forces. An investigation revealed the truth that he had been sending information to the enemy, that his sabotage had weakened the palace defenses. His treachery had opened the door for the attack. Justice had found him in the end. Lyra ran through the blood-soaked courtyard, searching desperately. She found Taeho just as his legs finally gave out. She caught him before he hit the ground, wrapping her arms around him, holding him up. "You came back," she whispered. His eyes found hers. He was barely conscious. His body was failing, but he was still there. "Still fighting, promised," he murmured. "Promised I would buy time." "You did," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You bought us all the time we needed." "Did not say how much," he whispered. Then his eyes closed, and the ghost of Velanine finally allowed himself to fall. The doctors said he should have died. They said it many times in many different ways, as if repeating it would help them understand. No creature could survive the wounds Kung Taeho had suffered. No heart could keep beating after losing that much blood. No mind could stay together after that much pain. But humans were not like other creatures. Taeho lay in the medical bay for 3 weeks. Machines hummed around him, pumping medicine into his blood and knitting his broken body back together. The Ethon doctors worked in shifts, marveling at his ability to heal from injuries that should have been fatal. Lyra visited every day. She came in the morning, before the palace woke up. She came in the evening after her duties were done. She came whenever she could find a spare moment, drawn to his bedside like a flower turning toward the sun. At first, she just sat with him. She held his hand and watched him breathe and thanked the stars that he was still alive. Later, when the doctor said it might help, she started talking to him. She told him about her day. She told him about the rebuilding efforts and the alliance negotiations and the messages of gratitude pouring in from across the Dominion. She read him poetry. The same Ethon poems he had been studying in the library. Her voice was soft and gentle. Sometimes she thought she saw his fingers twitch in response. One morning, she arrived to find his eyes open. He looked terrible. His face was pale and thin. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. The scar on his cheek stood out against his skin like a brand. But he was awake. He was alive. And when he saw her, something in his expression changed. Softened. "How long?" he asked. His voice was rough from weeks of silence. 3 weeks, she said. "The doctors say you are a medical miracle. They want to study you." A small sound escaped his throat. It might have been a laugh. Humans are hard to kill. It is both our gift and our curse. Lyra pulled her chair closer to his bed. She had so many things she wanted to say, so many questions she wanted to ask. But only one thing seemed important. "You saved us all," she said. "The palace. The city. My family. You and your companions held the line when no one else could." Taeho closed his eyes. 12 of them did not survive. Good people, friends. They deserved better than to die in a foreign land, fighting someone else's war. "They will be honored," Lyra promised. "My father has declared them heroes of the Dominion. Their names will be remembered for generations." "Names do not bring the dead back," he said quietly, "but I appreciate the gesture." They sat in silence for a while. Outside the window, the city was slowly rebuilding. Cranes and construction ships filled the sky. Life was returning to normal, piece by piece. "The alliance is secure," Lyra finally said. "Earth has sent more ships, more soldiers. The Council is calling you a hero. My father wants to give you the highest honors our people can offer." Taeho opened his eyes and looked at her. "What do you want?" The question caught her off guard. "What do I want?" "You are still wearing the betrothal bracelet," he said, nodding toward her wrist. The marriage was arranged for political reasons, but everything is different now. The alliance is secure without it. You do not have to go through with something you were forced into. Lyra looked down at the bracelet. It was a simple band of silver and crystal, the traditional symbol of Ethon engagement. She had worn it since the day her father told her about the arrangement. At first, it had felt like a chain. Now it felt like something else entirely. She remembered the trembling girl who had begged her father to choose anyone else. She remembered the fear that had consumed her every time she looked at the hologram of her intended husband. She remembered thinking that she was being given to a monster, but monsters did not bandage wounded animals in the garden. Monsters did not send money to orphanages. Monsters did not cry about the friends they had lost. Monsters did not throw themselves into certain death to protect people they barely knew. "I want to know you," she said finally. "Not the ghost of Elanine, not the hero from the stories, not the monster that everyone fears." She reached out and took his hand again, feeling the rough scars against her smooth skin. "I want to know you, the real you. The man who reads poetry and has nightmares and cares about small, hurt creatures." Tejo stared at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his eyes. The walls he had built around himself, the defenses that kept everyone at a distance, began to crack. "That might be the scariest thing anyone has ever asked of me," he admitted. Lyra smiled. It was the first real smile she had given him since they met. "Then we will be scared together." The wedding took place 1 year later. It was the largest celebration in Ethon history. Representatives from both empires attended. Billions watched the broadcast across dozens of worlds. The ceremony combined human and Ethon traditions, creating something new and beautiful from two very different cultures. Lyra wore white, the Ethon color of new beginnings. Tejo wore black, the human color of commitment. They stood together before the gathered crowd, two people from two worlds, choosing to become one. When the ceremony asked if Princess Lyra accepted this union willingly, her voice was clear and strong. There was no fear in it. There was no hesitation. Only certainty. When the ceremony asked if Kong Tejo accepted this union willingly, he looked at the woman beside him. The woman who had seen the monster and chosen to find the man beneath. The woman who had held his broken body in her arms and refused to let go. "Yes," he said. "With everything I am." The crowd erupted in cheers. Humans and Ethon people celebrated together, dancing and laughing and crying tears of joy. Two species that had been strangers were becoming family. Emperor Vorus watched from his throne with tears in his ancient eyes. He had given his daughter to a monster. He had expected her to suffer. Instead, she had tamed the beast with kindness and patience and love. She had found the man inside the legend. He had never been more proud. Far away. In the dark spaces between stars, the Hollow Collective received reports of the Alliance. The hive mind processed the information across billions of neural connections. Humans and Ethons were now one people. The species that had defeated them at Velanine now had friends, partners, loved ones to protect. Something unusual moved through the collective's network. It was not quite emotion. The hive mind did not feel things the way individual creatures did. But it was close. It was recognition of danger. It was calculation of risk. It was something that might, in simpler terms, be called fear. The humans had found something worth fighting for. And a human was something to protect. It was far more dangerous than a human with nothing to lose. The collective began to reconsider its plans. Back on Ethon Prime, Lyra and Tejo stood together on the palace balcony, looking out at the celebrating crowds below. The night sky was full of fireworks and flying lights. The air was full of music and laughter. "Are you happy?" Lyra asked, leaning against his shoulder. Tejo wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. For the first time and longer than he could remember, the weight on his soul felt lighter. The nightmares would never fully disappear. The scars would never fully heal. But standing here with this woman who had seen his darkness and loved him anyway, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. He said quietly, "I think I finally am." And somewhere in his chest, the ghost began to fade, and the man began to live again.